Hello and welcome to the Alpine Valley School podcast. I'm your host, Mark Gallivan, a former AVS student, a graduate, and a current staff member at the school. This is episode 22 of our show. You can find show notes for this episode at alpinevalleySchool.com/podcast/EP22. The topic of the show today is open campus. For as long as AVS has been around, it's had an open campus. And what that boils down to is that students 9 years and older are free to come and go from the campus as they please. They can leave school at any time during the day, whether to go to the park, a local fast food restaurant, or a local shopping center. Once they can drive, they can pretty much go wherever they like, with the understanding that they will eventually return in time to complete their responsibilities, whatever those may be. People who are new to the school want to understand why open campus is important. Why do we let kids have free range? And the answer has several different components. The first one is physical autonomy. Obviously, one of the foundations of our school is respecting individual autonomy. And part of that is the ability to move themselves wherever they want to go. That builds the second tier, which is responsibility. That there's an element of personal responsibility in saying, we trust you to go out into the world and to make good decisions and to be a good representative of the school. And that you will ultimately be responsible to get yourself wherever it is that you want to go, get yourself back, and that you will still fulfill all your duties at school. So you'll be back in time for judicial committee, you'll be back in time for chores, and whatever else it is that you've signed up to do. And that responsibility over time becomes very innate for kids. And they start to see that we really do trust them, and that can really shift that perspective in taking responsibility for themselves as a whole. Open campus also allows students to practice adulthood. As adults, we can go wherever we like. We often have responsibilities like a job or a family that make it so that we have to be certain places at certain times, but ultimately the choice is ours to go wherever we want and make sure that we are back when we say we're going to be back. And so it allows the kids to practice that very adult experience in a safe way and with other people. And frequently kids go off campus as a social activity to go do something together. And so it allows them to emulate those experiences that we all have as adults and kind of take for granted. So what does open campus look like in our school? So if you are 9 years and older, then you would go to our sign-on computer and would sign off campus, letting us know where you're going, when you'll be back, and what cell phone number we can reach you at. And typically at this age, most kids have cell phones these days, so that's a great way to get in touch with them. And mostly kids head off in groups, as I said, looking for adventure or with some specific aim in mind. As I said, most kids have cell phones these days, and so that does add an element of safety to going off campus, of always having the ability to get in touch with the school. And if anything did go wrong, then the kids could call us and say, we need you to come get us, or here's what's going on, and that kind of thing. We have also in the past had student IDs that kids would carry with them in a wallet or a pocket that said, essentially, our school has an open campus policy. They know that I'm off campus. It's all okay. So if the child was ever confronted with an adult who is concerned about their safety, they could then show them that ID. It's not something we've done in a few years just because of resources and nobody wanting to head up that project, but it is something that we could do again. Some students do have agreements with their parents about what they will do or will not do while they're off campus, or even really whether or not they can go off campus under certain circumstances. So some parents have agreements with their kids that they will only go off campus with an older teen or with a staff member. And while those aren't necessarily things that we as staff will enforce, we do try to be aware of them and remind kids of those responsibilities to their parents. Open campus is something that adults feel nervous about sometimes, and that's understandable. Even though some of us grew up very free and kind of going wherever we wanted and riding bikes and things like that, in the modern age, that can feel a little risky. So there's a couple of resources I'm going to put in the show notes that are more holistically talking about the value of letting kids have free reign. One of those voices in that conversation that's very prominent is a woman by the name of Lenore Skenazy, who allowed her son to ride the New York City subway when he was 11 years old and made national headlines as a result. So I should say by himself. He rode the subway by himself at 11 years old. So she's written a book called Free Range Kids and has an associated blog that is on the same subject and talks a lot about the value of letting kids go out on their own and have those experiences. I'm also going to link to a video in the show notes from a talk that she gave here at school, which again talks about the same kind of subject and links it back to our open campus policy. We have had open campus at Alpine Valley School for 20 years in some form or another. And really what we've seen is more often than not, the benefits of letting kids have that freedom outweigh the potential negatives. It allows them to grow. It allows them to be responsible. And all we ask in exchange is just that they treat this as a privilege and keep us informed and be good representatives of the school. Here today to talk about their experiences with Open Campus are 3 Alpine Valley School graduates, Josh Mann, Gina Mancuso, and Aubrey Suter. They all 3 went to school right around the same time, and in our interview, they talked about their experiences with Open Campus, even as little kids, and why it was important for them to have those experiences, even when they were following their parents' rules or when they were doing something that seems pretty innocuous, like taking a walk around the neighborhood. Those actually turned out to be very formative experiences for them, and they tell some great stories about what they learned from having that freedom and gaining that responsibility. Here's our conversation. Hey guys, thanks for being on the show.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure. Would you each start by just going around and saying your name and introducing yourselves?
Yeah, my name's Josh Mann. I work at Costco as the sales supervisor, and I graduated from AVS in 2009.
My name's Gina Mancuso. I also graduated in 2009, and I'm currently working as an information security engineer, and that's what I've been doing recently.
All right, and I'm Aubrey Suter. I graduated in 2008, and I work in software development as an Agile coach.
Awesome. So we are talking today about Open Campus. And so I wanted to kind of get your perspective as some people who experienced what might have been the heyday of Open Campus, I think, and all kind of went to school at the same time, and just kind of ask some questions about your experiences. So the first question I have is, what was your first experience with Open Campus? Like, what's the first time you remember leaving the campus? And if you want to start, Gina, you're welcome to.
Okay, yeah. It must have been at the old building, and I must have been around 6 or 7 because I think we changed buildings by the time it was 8. So I was pretty young when I did it the first time. And it was either going to 7-Eleven with a staff member to go and get candy, or it was going to the park with a bunch of friends and a staff member to just go play at the park for a couple hours.
Awesome. Anybody else have an early memory of going off campus?
I've been... Oh, go ahead, Josh.
Okay. I don't remember my first time going off campus, but some of my fondest memories, early memories of going off campus when I was very young were, I remember we used to all the time go over to the magic shop. I can't remember, Valhalla's, I think it was called. We went there all the time and bought magic cards and like D&D stuff. And then also pretty much every day, Hannah and I would go off campus and just go on long walks, like hour or 2 hour long walks around the neighborhood and just talk. And those were some of the best memories I have of Open Campus.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and similarly for me, it's kind of vague. I'm sure that it was going to the local park. There was a park just down the street, kind of similar to the current campus, where we would go pretty often. There was a play structure, and we'd play tag there. And I don't remember it being a particularly like big deal to me. It was sort of a given. It was just sort of what kids did. But it was good. It was fun. It was nice to not have a whole lot of limitation around.
Yeah, so you said it seems like it didn't seem like a big deal. Josh or Gina, did it seem like a big deal to you ever?
No, not really. Not looking back on it.
Yeah, no, it was never a big issue to me. I mean, I lived in a household where we were pretty much allowed to do whatever we wanted, whenever we wanted. And so the idea of going off campus never scared me or was never a big deal.
Yeah, we kind of just grew up that way. And I mean, there were definitely rules around it too. Like my mom was like, you don't get to go off campus unless there's someone at least 16 or there's a staff member or there's a group of like a certain size so that we're all safe and paying attention to each other. But it was never like this big, like daunting thing or this big, scary new like thing that we'd never done before. So it was just pretty normal.
Yeah, and that brings up an interesting point, Gina, which is sometimes the parents do have regulations or, restrictions about going off campus. So yours were that you had to go with someone who was older than you, and was that it?
Well, I was at AVS for a long time. I started when I was 6, and then I graduated when I was 18. So the rules did change as I got older. When I was really young, it was definitely go with a staff member. And then once I got a little bit older, I want to say maybe like 9 or 10, then having an older student was good. That was the rule then. And then as I got a little bit older than that, like 11, 12 and past there, it was just go with some friends or go with a friend at least so that you're not by yourself. And those were the general rules that my mom had for me. And it made sense. I never really wanted to go off campus by myself anyway, so it worked out.
Yeah, and did you ever violate those rules and even accidentally?
Not that I remember.
Not to out you or anything. I just wondered.
I can't say.
Josh or Aubrey, did you guys ever have anything like that with your parents?
Yeah, I think what Gina described sounds about right for me too. I don't remember exactly what the rules were, but I know that my mom actually was pretty anxious about the prospect of me going off campus, and actually my brother too. So I do remember, initially it was probably with a staff member most of the time, or at least like an older teenager. And as I got older, I think it sort of evolved to be less restrictive. But even when I was at the old building, so I couldn't have been older than, 10 or so, I remember, it was okay that I could go to the park with a big group of kids and not worry about, not, stress my mom out too much. So, and then as I got older, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit later, but I also had, an internship at a barn. And so I was actually leaving campus quite a lot, and I'd take, other groups of students to the park as the escort as the older kid. And so, yeah, I mean, it changed over time, but I never felt like, I had to walk a really fine line between exercising my freedom and respecting my parents' rules. Like we talked about it. We had a pretty decent balance that I was always comfortable with.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to highlight kind of something else that you said, that like you transitioned from being the little kid who went with other people to the park and to being the older kid that took little kids to the park. And that's kind of cool too.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things. I mean, it's in a lot of different aspects of the school that type of thing comes up, but that sort of role reversal is just really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So Josh, I don't remember our parents having any rules for us about going off campus. They didn't for me anyway. Maybe they did for you because you're special or something. But do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, no, I don't think we ever even had any rules about like leaving the house at any time. So we never had those rules, I think, because we were never problematic in that way, and they never got worried about it. I mean, when I was younger, I never really wanted to go off campus, and particularly not by myself. So the only times I ever went off campus anyway was with other people.
Yeah.
Rarely with even one other person. Most of the time it was a group of people who were going to the park or going to the D&D store, whatever it was.
I think Valhalla's was its name. It came back when you said it. That sounded right to me.
Yeah.
Did any of you guys go off campus by yourselves, with the exception of like going to a job?
Like when we were young?
When you were like youngish.
I'm sure that I did. I just can't think of. I think usually the big incentive to go off campus was with a group. So I don't remember a whole lot of solo trips. I think as I got older, I think once we were in the other building, I might walk to like Target or Taco Bell or that area to get lunch periodically, or go to the park and kind of sit and journal or something like that. But especially as a young kid, I just didn't really have any interest in going off by myself.
Gina, do you remember ever going off by yourself?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I really don't actually think I did. I feel like the same as Aubrey said, it was the reason you would go off campus is because there was a big group going off campus and you didn't want to get left out, or they were going to go do something fun without you.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think that rings true today too. Like I don't really see kids just like taking off because it's fun. I mean, they could if they're older than 9 now, but that's not really something that typically happens. So it sounds like that was kind of the same in your day.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And then like the reverse is true too. If you're off by yourself and all your friends are back at school, like you're being left out that way in a way too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So did you ever have a time when you went off campus and you felt unsafe? Like you felt worried about anything that was happening?
I never felt unsafe due to being off campus. I want to say the only time I ever felt unsafe when I went off campus was due to the person who was taking us off campus and their driving, not due to the actual being off campus. So I can't remember a time where I was ever uncomfortable when I was off campus. No.
Yeah, I remember my biggest worry was always just like crossing busy streets, especially with big groups with small kids. Because like Aubrey said before too, once I got older, I also was the chaperone for some of the little kids, and they don't pay as much attention as you might like when they're crossing busy streets. And I was always pretty stressed out about that, even though nothing even close to bad happened. It was just kind of like this anxiousness that I had. But that's the worst I can remember ever feeling like anxious or not completely comfortable.
Sure. And it's a little like herding cats too. So you have to worry about that, like keeping them all together.
Yeah. And I can't think of any time that I was really like concerned about anything that was going on around me when I was off campus. I knew the neighborhood, and I felt like I kind of had a handle on things, and I always knew how to get back. So I never felt like I was sort of beyond my abilities.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good feeling. And it makes me think of a time that I went off campus and decided I was going to, like a bunch of us went and decided we were going to take a bus to go downtown. And did you go with us, Aubrey? I feel like you might have, when we went to the Wizard's Chest.
I don't think I did.
Okay. Then maybe it was just some of the older teenagers. And we decided we were going to take a bus downtown. And one of my friends insisted that he knew which bus we were supposed to take. And so he was wrong. And we got terribly lost. And this was in the days before I think we had a cell phone, but it wasn't like a smartphone. It didn't do anything. It just made calls. And so we had to like ask people which bus went somewhere. And at the time, I remember it being really frustrating, but I think like in my memory of it was a very empowering experience of like, I can get horribly lost and have no idea where I am, but I can still find my way back. And like we did, and it took a really long time and we were all really mad at each other when we got back. But like when we sit around and talk about that moment now, it's like, oh, look at, like, we did this thing as, 14-year-olds. We went on this great adventure and we found out how to navigate the bus system, and we found out how not to kill each other, and we came back, and it all worked out. And like, those are some of my favorite kind of memories of having that freedom.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of part of the important part of open campus too is it breeds that sort of independence where you can go off campus by yourself or with even like a couple other people, and you usually when you're younger you're walking to wherever you're going, so you have that sense of like you're walking to this place that maybe you've never been to or you've only been to a couple times, and you just have this sense of that independence and that responsibility of knowing where you're going and how to get back and when you should get back. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as you were talking about that, your story, Mark, it reminded me that, you know, I can't think of any examples of times when I was like totally out of my comfort zone or like stretched beyond, you know, a place where I was comfortable. But I wish I had more specifics. I know that there so many of the trips that we went on, even as groups, you know, there were little adventures like that. You know, they may not have been as grand in scale as taking a bus downtown, but, you know, there were little things we had to figure out along the way that I just take for granted now. But I think that, you know, as I kind of put myself back in that perspective, they did feel kind of grand at the time, you know, like every time that we left campus, it was kind of an adventure. I wouldn't say it was especially scary, but it was novel, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. So we talked a little bit about like when you guys were younger and what happened when you were older. And did you go off campus, do you think more when you were older, less, for different reasons? I know, Aubrey, you already said you had an internship. So would you talk a little more about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I think you mentioned in a previous the podcast with me before that when I was about 8, I went through the phone book and called every single barn in the area and asked if they would accept an 8-year-old volunteer. And I found one that did. And that same place eventually was where I found one of my mentors she was my mentor for several years after that. And I want to say I was about like 10 or 11 when I officially started doing an apprenticeship with her during school hours. Prior to that, you know, from the time I was like maybe 9, I had been working with her on weekends and evenings, and just over time, it wasn't enough. I wanted to get more immersed in the world of horse training. So, I went through a process. I can't remember exactly the details of, you know, putting a motion through school meeting to approve this internship. I want to say it was like maybe 2 days a week. I would take off part of the afternoon and, you know, I had to figure out a ride to get to the barn because it was about 20 minutes away. And, you know, there were some logistics to sort out, but it was just an extension of school for me. It was another way that I could spend my school day. And I am so incredibly appreciative of the fact that I was really able to just immerse myself in something that I was so passionate about and not have to spend my time, you know, in a building somewhere else wishing that I could be there. Like there was never really any question that I could make it happen if it really mattered to me. So I did, and I had that internship. You know, I can't remember how official it was and what the hours were or anything like that, but up until I was about 16 or 17, I want to say. And, you know, eventually I did end up doing professional horse training for a while. And I honestly, I don't think I could have developed those skills and the relationships that I had that allowed me to do that if I had only been able to pursue that over the weekends and evenings that would normally be available to me. So it was an awesome experience.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So Gina, what about you? How did your relationship with Open Campus change once you were a teenager?
I don't know if it really changed for me that much. I pretty much always stayed on campus. I never really had this drive to go off unless there was something like big happening off campus. I do remember liking the fact that we could go play at the park instead of going just to play in our play structure, which just got so boring after a while. And then also as I got older too, just being able to like go out to lunch for my birthday with my friends without having to worry about staff members coming with us or other people like supervising us and that kind of thing. But I think for the most part, it was pretty consistently just like an occasional thing for me that was just like a fun every once in a while.
Yeah. Josh, how about you?
I know when younger teenager, I remember that was when I was doing the walks pretty much every day with Hannah. So that was when I loved open campus the most. And that was like, I don't know, when I was maybe 14, 15. I can't remember exactly, but it was like young teens when we were going on those walks. And then after that, when I got my permit and actually started driving more, open campus became less important to me. I think because at that point I started getting the independence outside of school where I had the ability to pretty much go wherever I wanted. And similar to what Aubrey was saying earlier, there was a sort of role reversal because I remember there were times where I would take a group of the younger kids and we would go somewhere like Target or some other place and buy lunch or whatever it was that we wanted. So that part of open campus was really nice because we could just, once you had a car, you could drive somewhere and get lunch or that sort of thing. But as I got older and got that independence through having a car and having the ability to go where I wanted, even when I wasn't at school, open campus was a little less important to me, at least.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's probably pretty typical as well, that once you're driving and you have that option pretty much all the time, it's not, you don't always have to use it during school when you're there for whatever reason, you know, if you're not wanting to necessarily leave during that time. So that makes a lot of sense. So if you put yourself in the position now of a parent, if you can imagine having children, as I know none of the three of you do presently, how would you feel about open campus for your child? So at this point, it's only 9 and older at our school that can go off campus freely. So the younger than 9 have to have a staff member with them. And if you kind of imagine that scenario for your own child, what sort of thoughts and feelings does that bring up for you?
I think that is a very fair rule. I mean, I would approach it the same way that my parents approached it with me, in that I'd want to be as comfortable as possible with my child going off campus. I think it can differ depending on your child and the needs of your child and their age and things like that. But I think 9 and older, to me, that's like a perfect comfort zone. Like once they hit that age, I would feel comfortable with them going off campus, preferably maybe with at least one other person so they're not by themselves. But I would be very, very comfortable with that for my child.
For me, I don't know. As I've gotten older, 9 seems like a younger and younger and younger age. You know what I mean? It's like when I was 9 and 10 going off campus, I thought everything was fine. I was totally cool with it. Like, obviously, I'd be responsible enough to do that. But like, as an adult, I see how little they look and I worry more. But I do think that if you trust your kids and if you lay down rules that you and your kids are both comfortable with, that's the important thing. And so at least for me, I would definitely have them go off with somebody else when they're young. I would definitely make sure they had a cell phone because that's important. But as long as you, and you know your child too. And so if you know that they're responsible when they're out at the store with you or whatever it is, then you can kind of assess the situation as far as how they'll act in public on their own. And I think that as long as you all come up with like a good family plan, I guess, then that's the way to go about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but I don't know any 10-year-olds that don't have phones. So that's usually not a concern anymore. Yeah. But that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I just would agree with both Josh and Gina. I obviously I would be a little bit more cautious if I felt like my 9-year-old were completely irresponsible and couldn't be trusted for some reason. But I kind of find it doubtful that I'll feel that way about my kid. And just based on my own experience and watching even kids who I grew up with, who I didn't necessarily feel like were, super mature, they saw it as a really important responsibility to represent the school well when they were out and, not get in trouble. And, I think everyone was careful not only for their own sake, but for the sake of the school and the people they were with, if they went with a group. So I wouldn't really stress about it too much. I think I might have some sort of like guidelines around, go with people. And if you don't go with people, like at least make sure someone knows where you are, and kind of leave it at that. Cause I just think that independence, it's sort of like, even if they don't exercise it, the freedom and the trust that signals that, you really can just go off campus and do what you want to do. Like, this isn't like a surveillance state where we say you're free at school and then, secretly I'm having the staff report back to me or something like that. Like
we tail you in trench coats.
Yeah, exactly.
Hiding behind trash cans.
Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that you kind of go all the way and say, yeah, you can go and do your thing. And, we care about you and we support you and, we want to make sure you're safe. But, I trust you to loop us in when that's needed.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to point out too, that I think is definitely different from when we were kids, is we actually have like an official sign in and out system for going off campus now, where you have to put your name, who's going with you, where you're going, when you'll be back, what's your cell phone number. And then like we as staff look at that. And if you said you'd be back at 10:15 and it's now 10:14 and you're not back, like we'll call you. And if you don't answer, then we're going to go look for you. And like, it really doesn't happen very often, but it is like the system that's built into it now, that I think when we were kids, we probably like, we had to let somebody know where we were going, but we didn't have like that necessarily that formality around it. That's a little different.
Yeah. I think that came around in the later years. And I think I remember the debate around adding it, and kind of how heated it got, but again, in practice, it didn't really feel like it was that big of a difference.
No, and I was just going to say, kind of leapfrogging off of what Aubrey said, that I think that having that trust and that responsibility of saying, like, you get to go out and do this. I don't want to try to tell people how to parent, but I think it's such an important thing for a child, particularly at that age level, because that's kind of like the age group when the rebellious nature, starts to grow a little bit. And if you give your child that responsibility, that independence, that trust of saying, go out, be safe, we care about you, we're going to keep track of you, but we're going to let you have this freedom to go out and kind of do your own thing, that might kind of reduce the rebelliousness that they have later, because they've already been given that freedom to go out and just be with their friends and have fun and not have to worry about mom or dad calling them every 5 minutes to check up on them,
Yeah, absolutely. And just like you said, that implicit trust that's underlying the whole open campus nature. And when we present it to new students, usually we say, this is a privilege. Like, this is something we can take away if you're not using it responsibly. So we encourage you to like really think of this as something that is to your own benefit, and you should use it responsibly as a result of that.
Yeah, I think that's really good.
Yeah, awesome. So as we wrap up here, does anybody have a favorite story about Open Campus that you want to share? I know you've all talked about different experiences you've had, but if you have another story that you remember that you think would be interesting to put out there, it would be great to hear it.
Oh, I have one, and I just thought of it. I had a different one, but this one's better. So my senior year, I guess, my last year when I was going to graduate, I think it was the very last week of school, and we were all just right before summer. We all were kind of just like, didn't have a lot planned or a lot to do. And so I remember it was me and Ari and Josh. I don't remember if Aubrey was there or not, but we planned this, and Ethan and a bunch of other people planned this huge kind of scavenger hunt where we would walk around. We walked around the neighborhood around where the school was, and we would find different like things and we'd jot them all down. And then we would go back to campus. We got a bunch of all the kids together and we got them into teams. And we're like, whoever can like find all these things and take pictures of them on your phone and then get back to us first will get like this big prize. And so it turned into, from this being this very lazy kind of like last day of school day, to this like big adventure. And we're all wandering around the neighborhood taking pictures of like different bushes and things that we had decided we needed them to find. And it was really fun.
Oh,
it
that's
was like
awesome.
a couple hours, and we had, I want to say at least half the school was out there participating in our big scavenger hunt, and I really enjoyed it.
That is so cool. So I remember when we went off campus to go see Star Wars: The Phantom Menace. I remember that it was very exciting to me to go in the middle of the day and go see a movie and just like leave. And that was really like, oh my gosh, am I doing this? Am I going to get in trouble? That was a fun feeling. Cool. Well, you guys, Josh and Gina and Aubrey, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I think you had some great things to say, and I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks to Josh, Gina, and Aubrey for sharing their story on the show today. Josh, Gina, and Aubrey have also done individual episodes of this show where I interviewed them on various subjects and about their time at school. I will link to each of those individual episodes in the show notes if you want to listen to those as well. If you want to get in touch with any of the three graduates on the show today, you can email me at podcast@alpinevalley.school.com, and I'll pass that along to them to get back in touch with you. There are a lot more resources on Open Campus in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at alpinevalley.school.com/podcast/EP22 for episode 22. To get in touch with me here at the show, you can send an email to podcast@alpinevalley.school.com, or you can send us a message on social media. We are Alpine Valley School on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. As always, thanks for listening. I'm Mark Gallivan. This is the Alpine Valley School podcast, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks with more stories of real learning for real life.